So an understanding of the foundations of the biblical story can enhance and improve our understanding of the rest of the Bible. So as we understand more of the Bible, we get a greater they feed back on each other, and we get a greater understanding of the Bible as a whole. So I want to focus on what I think are the foundational sections of Scripture, but I'm not necessarily interested in talking about what happens necessarily in those sections. Rather, I want to focus on what these Scriptures have to tell us about God. So instead, I originally kind of pitched this to Tim as the story of the Bible, but in stories, the characters and events are the focus of what is happening. And I want to shift away from those things, and I want to shift from the characters and events of the stories to shifting on God and Jesus Christ. So that's why I've called it either the history of salvation or the story of salvation. I find this isn't particularly done when we read the Old Testament, and when it's done, it's usually relegated to specific passages or prophecies that are usually actually referred to in the New Testament. So I want to kind of go through both the Old and the New Testament and kind of look for salvation, look for God's hand, look for Jesus in places that I think you'll expect, and also places I think you won't expect as well. And like any story, we need to start at a beginning. And the beginning is, and in this case, the beginning is the most well-known beginning in all of Western literature. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But if we know the beginning, why are we going to start there? Well, I like to play video games, and I don't like the casual ones where you can like relax and not think and just flip things. I don't like those ones. I like the difficult ones, the punishing ones. And I've been playing a game recently that's basically just a vast scrolling map. Vast scrolling map. It's basically just a big maze. And when you start the game, you have no idea where you are, and you have no map. And players don't know where they are, and they don't know where they're supposed to go. This is actually part of the map that's on the back there. When the player eventually does get a piece of the map, their location isn't on the map. So it becomes very apparent very quickly that a map, at least to begin with, is kind of useless. Because if you don't know where you are, you don't know where you're going. And so you end up wandering aimlessly. So that's what I want to do, is I want to pinpoint us exactly where we are and exactly where we're going. And this goes for anything. Without pinpointing where we are, we have no hope of navigating the labyrinth of life and of faith. So we're starting in the beginning to talk about the main characters of this story of salvation, being both God and man. So we're going to start by asking who is God and who is man in Genesis 1 and 2. And we're going to do that by comparing Genesis with some ancient text. This is because the reason we're going to compare Genesis to ancient texts is because this is who Genesis was written to. This is why Genesis was written. Moses looked at the writings of his era and the place where he was, and wrote Genesis to give Israel their story in response to the destructive stories that were circulating at the time. Now we read Genesis in response to a whole new set of stories from our era, from our time. The best, most fruitful way to read Genesis is to see it within the Bronze Age context, because that's the original audience. And then that way, we can see what this means, what this Genesis text means for a modern audience. When we know what it means in the original audience, we can apply it to the meaning of our own lives in the modern era. So we're going to look at the main character as God. We're going to see what does the Bronze Age, or what did the Bronze Age tell themselves about God? What do we, in the modern age, tell ourselves about God? What does the Bible say about God? And then we're going to look at man. What did the Bronze Age tell themselves about men, or mankind? What does the modern age tell us about man, or try to tell us about man? And what does the Bible, I said Bible age, no. What does the Bible say about man? That's because I copied and pasted, but that's Wednesday. It's going fast, copy paste. So the gods of the Bronze Age. The Bronze Age people were polytheistic, which means that they meant in a whole bunch of gods, multiple gods. This was the overwhelming consensus in the Bronze Age. There were monotheists, those that believed in just one god, but they never lasted very long. They were generally despised. In Egypt, we have Akhenaten, who tried to make Aten the number one god, and as soon as he died, they wiped him out and went straight back to polytheism as soon as he died. And he wasn't liked in Egypt. And so we're going to focus on the Akkadian creation myth, because that's the culture of the area where Israel ends up settling. And it went around the time that Genesis was written. So if you look on that where it says cedar forest, you've got that little stretch of green there. All that green is Acadia. And that little part that goes into Israel, that's all Akkad. And so you can see that, we have, it's being written when the text I'm going to read, or not read, but going to go over, it was written when Israel was in Egypt under slavery. So it's very, very close to Moses leading his people up into the Promised Land. So these gods are attributed to different aspects of the world. So in the Akkadian myth, we have a bunch of different gods. We have Tiamat, who represents salt water and also chaos. We have Apsu, who represents fresh water. We have Marduk, who is the storm god, and so on and so forth. The gods were not eternal. They were created often out of these entities that kind of are always just there. Like Tiamat and Apsu are kind of just there, and they mingle together to make the other gods. Creation, particularly in the physical sense, where we get the spiritual making physical things, is done in acts of violence and death. So these are important things to understand. The gods are temperamental and have turbulent emotions, making them no better than just very powerful humans. They were neither good nor bad, but they acted harshly and very reactive, either to other gods or even to people. So here's the Akkadian creation myth. It's called Enuma Elish, or the When on High. It was written during Israel's oppression in Egypt. The gods spring out of the primordial Apsu and Tiamat, which is the fresh and salt water. Eventually, a young Marduk, a strong god, is chosen to battle against the rebellious Tiamat, who is also known as well as being salt water, Tiamat is also chaos. After killing Tiamat, Marduk divides Tiamat's body into two and uses those two halves to make heaven and earth. After this, Marduk decides to create savage man and announces to the other gods that someone who contrived the uprising and made Tiamat rebel should be killed and their blood used to form mankind. So we have a bunch of these gods, and they kind of stir on Tiamat to rebel. Tiamat rebels, Marduk kills her, makes heaven and earth, and then he wants to make this thing called man. And so he tells the council of gods, hey, one of these other gods who kind of spurred on Tiamat to rebel, we should get one of them and use them to make mankind. So that's what they do. They go and they grab a god named Kingu. And they take Kingu and they kill him, and they take his blood out, and Marduk's father, Ea, takes his blood out and makes man. And the gods create mankind and imposed upon mankind the service of the gods. In other words, they made mankind slaves to the gods. Okay, so as you can see, this is a very different vision of the cosmos. A very different vision of man, and a very different vision of God than what we're used to hearing. But this is the foundational text of the time and place. This is the story that when Israel went into Egypt, that everybody was telling themselves. This is their Genesis 1. Okay? This is the stuff that Moses is dealing with, and that Israel kind of flirts with, not even flirts, full of adultery with, when they come into the promised land. Okay? So we're going to go to now, that's the ancient story. That's the Akkadian myth that Israel comes into. But what about our myth? What's our story? In 2005, a sociologist named Christian Smith coined a very big phrase that I have to use called moralistic therapeutic deism. I'm just going to call it MTD from now on because that's too much for me to say. They're big words. We'll go through each of them and talk about what they mean. So moralistic, this means that the religion has, or the belief system has, a set of values. And although in this case, the Bibles don't come from the values, don't come from the Bible, they come from people's perception of what most religions teach as moral. So what's true for every religion, and then that's what they think the morals should be. These kind of universal truths. They have a twist, and the twist is this therapeutic part, actually. And this is the gospel, the good news of happiness and self-esteem. Everyone should be happy and feel good about themselves. And the highest virtue, that's the highest virtue, and that's the highest good. And what they've done is they've taken most usually the Christian moral framework that we have in the Christian text in the Bible, and they've twisted it into focus on happiness and self-esteem. Okay, so the morals are based on their therapeutic understanding, on their happiness and wellness understanding is where they are also getting their morals. And then we have deism. And deism is the belief in a God that isn't involved in the world and doesn't make an effort to fix it. Now, this system of belief isn't completely deist, but God doesn't act unless it's on the behest of humans, unless it's on humans actively seeking God, then God comes in. Deism is like the clockwork God, the clockmaker God. gets all the gears going, and then he lets it go and walks away. And just lets the clock run. Okay? So this moralistic therapeutic deism is what Christian Smith discovered was the major religion of young people at the time. This belief system believed that God created the world and wanted people to be good, but the central purpose of life is just to be happy and self-fulfilled. Good people go to heaven, and God is generally uninterested in people's lives unless there is a problem. This is what many would call spiritual but not religious. And this is actually what people mean when they say they're spiritual but not religious. It's what I call functional atheism. And atheism fits very well. Just take the deism out and put atheism in, and that's what most atheists are today. These are the people who might say there is a God, but then they don't act like it. This is the religion of the pale blue dot. Has anybody seen this picture before? No? If you look very, very closely, you'll see a pale, we're almost in the center, a little bit this way from the center, on that streak of light there. It's like a pixel. It's one dot, and that is Earth. And this picture is used to show people how small we are. I think Carl Sagan used this picture. And he also said, we're all made of star stuff. And you know this creation myth. We all know this creation myth. It's boring, it's tired, it's overly analytical. And I'm going to tell you it in the words of South Park creator Trey Parker. He said, basically, out of all the ridiculous religion stories, which are greatly, wonderfully ridiculous, the silliest one I've ever heard is, there's a big giant universe and it's expanding and it's going to collapse on itself and we're just here just because. To me, that is the most ridiculous explanation ever. Oh, I have an extra there. Just because. Okay? There isn't much to say here. There isn't much to say here about God, because the modern God doesn't do anything. It's all about the self. But regardless of this modern spiritual but not religious take, this take is often mistaken for the God of the Bible. But this could not be further from the truth, and it's about as far from the Bible as the polytheistic gods are. So who is God according to Genesis 1 and 2? Genesis 1 and 2 give us neither viewpoints of God. There are a few similarities here and there, which we should acknowledge. Both the Akkadian myth and modern understandings see God as a creator. Both Marduk and Yahweh are fixing chaos and achieving order, or at least trying to. The moralistic, the MTD crowd, understand there's something of a moral center to the universe, and that creation is good. But the differences are vast. When we read Genesis 1 and 2, creation is calm in comparison to the old myths. There's no blood, no violence, no death, no war, no struggle for supremacy. Only God speaking his word, let there be, and the resulting good. When God creates, it is good, and unlike both ancient and modern tellings of the creation myth, God deeply cares for his creation. They are not there to enrich himself, since God is perfect and does not require anything. Neither is God out there in the cosmos, unconcerned with human life. The pale blue dot is a cynical view of human life. Like our significance is somehow in direct relation to our proportion in the cosmos. We are infinitesimally small, therefore infinitesimally insignificant. This is ridiculous. Our significance comes from the God of the cosmos, not the cosmos itself. While not stated in Genesis, the traditional understanding of creation says God created everything out of nothing. He did not require the materials to be already available, let alone use the murder and destruction of other beings in order to create. In fact, God is prior to everything else because he is eternal. This means that he existed before anything ever existed. He is the cause of everything. Even the pagan Aristotle understood that there was a need for an unmoved mover or first cause. God is also independent of both people and creation. While the gods of paganism are directly tied into what pre-existed, such as the gods emerging from those salt and seawater gods, something was already present. And these gods represent things: moon, sun, sky, storm, etc. The biblical God, however, is not bound by his creation. He transcends it. However, the modern understanding of God takes his transcendence too far, likening God to a clockmaker and failing to understand God's immanence or his closeness, which is seen in his dealings with men, such as walking in the garden with Adam or making covenants with Abraham, Israel, and David. There are countless examples of God's immanence, his closeness, playing out in salvation history. God is both transcendent, high, and mighty, completely separate from the world, but he is also concerned, listening, and present. Listen to what God tells Moses in Exodus 3, 7-8. The Lord said, "I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt. I have given heed to their cry because of their taskmasters, and I am aware of their suffering, so I have come down." God says, "I have seen, I have heard, and I have come down." These are not words of a distant and an aloof God. The God of the Old Testament is the same God that we find in Jesus. John even uses Genesis 1 to tell us that Jesus was there in creation. There in the beginning was the Word. God saw, God heard, and God came down. All things came into being through him, that is Jesus. And apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Mankind. Now we turn to our other character in this salvation story, as mankind. Who did the ancient world believe themselves to be as people? Man is created by the gods through violence and struggle. Now, this is true no matter the ancient myth. The Egyptians, the Akkadians, Babylonians, all of them, physical being and man are almost always created through violence, struggle, and bloodshed. The result of the blood that was slain from a god and then mixed with clay. Mankind are slaves to the gods, responsible for feeding them, working on their behalf, and keeping them comfortable so that the gods can stop their toil and rest while man does all the work. In other stories from the same period, man multiplies and fills the earth, becoming loud, noxious, and violent. And their rowdiness keep the gods awake, which leads to the gods treating them poorly. And we're going to get in a few sermons to what they're going to do to men. Men's actions usually had direct bearing on what the gods would or wouldn't do. This wasn't about being good or bad, but about appeasing the gods. Whether it's the patron god of the city or a smaller personal god, The gods were fickle and difficult to please. That's the ancient world's answer to who am I? An afterthought, a slave made from a corpse, a noisy pest who exists to keep the gods happy. And what's the modern view of man? As I said earlier, we're looking at this moralistic, therapeutic, deist view. And remember, I chose this view because it's the most prominent view of God outside of in the Western world. It's impossible to come up with a creation story for this because it's not religion. It's a belief system. But this quote from Carl Sagan is probably the best creation myth that is embraced by these MTDs. You have it there? Oh, no, sorry. The nitrogen in our DNA, the calcium in our teeth, the iron in our blood, the carbon in our apple pies, were made in the interior of collapsing stars. We are made of star stuff. Wonderful. This is clearly an attempt to make people feel good about themselves. But it doesn't say that people have purpose. It says the opposite. We are just material. There's no purpose, no sin, therefore no judgment, just stuff. Despite this messy understanding of human origins, the moralistic aspect of this belief is that there is sort of an objective, all-encompassing morality, and that most people are basically good and decent. Therefore, most people feel that they're good enough to get into heaven. They might say, at least I'm not Hitler, or at least I've never killed someone, or at least I just minded my own business. These ultra-low bars are possible because God, in this view, is a distant one, transcendent and separate from our daily lives, like a divine butler, invisible, but there if we need him. The modern view of man is completely self-centered. The therapeutic is the idea of the personal well-being, self-fulfillment, and self-esteem as being the highest possible good, the ultimate virtues. So instead of virtues of faith, hope, love, justice, wisdom, self-control, and courage, we get the counterfeit virtues of tolerance, comfort, authenticity, niceness, self-esteem, and independence. Does this sound familiar? It's easy to go along with the crowd, to be nice and tolerant, to sometimes destructive behaviors in others, because the worst thing you can do is take away someone's autonomy or hurt their self-worth. Love thy neighbor has been replaced with live your truth. These are the virtues of multiculturalism, doctor-assisted suicide, and abortion. Anthony Esselin highlights the dangers of niceness and tolerating everything, and therefore loving nothing. He says, the very purpose of what is called multiculturalism is to destroy culture, by teaching students to dismiss their own and to patronize the rest. Hence, the antidote to love of this place is not only a hatred of this place, but a foreign engagement with any other place. Multiculturalism, in this sense, is like going a whoring, pretending to love every woman you meet, you love none at all. So the biblical view of man, neither of these give us a biblical view of man. So how does Genesis correct these understandings? Then the Lord God formed man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. First, our makeup is different from both ancient and modern understandings. In ancient thinking, man is formed out of a corpse. In MTD, man is completely materialistic, formed from the universe, a result of a mindless clockwork, or a mindless clockwork God, at best, or an accident at worst. Either way, it doesn't make any sense. In the biblical understanding, man is formed out of the ground by God, not in an act of violence or greed, but out of love. Not by accident or mindlessly, but with purpose. And then he breathes life into man. Every other animal in the biblical account is made up only of earth, but humans are made up of both earth and spirit, body and soul. Then God said, "Let us make man in our own image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. Second, man is made in the image of God. This idea of image is like the little idols the pagans would carve out and put in their temples as representations of their God. But we don't represent an idol. We are representations of the one true God. And we have been placed in God's temple, the earth, in order to reflect the character of God. Third, and connected to this, we were not put on earth as slaves to God, and not with some selfish understanding of trying to be self-fulfilled, but as vice regents, someone who has delegated authority on another's behalf. So we're vice regents of God, caretakers of the world. This is unthinkable in polytheism, where man is a slave to the whims of the gods and requires immanence, a closeness and personal relationship that isn't possible in the modern view, where man shares his authority and autonomy with no one. So we've heard three stories that have made or continue to make claims about who God is and who we are. What's clear from the ancient and modern stories is that there is no salvation. Both views are similar. The gods don't care enough to save you. The ancient ones are too selfish, and the modern one is too distant and non-existent, or non-existent. To add to this, in both views, mankind itself isn't worth saving. In the ancient view, they are noisy and violent slaves created only to relieve the god of their toil. In the modern view, there's nothing to be saved from. Man is simply born to serve himself. It is up to him or her to give him or herself meaning and to save themselves. We can stop living out these destructive stories. We can stop living as the center of our own universe, inventing our own truths and being held as slaves to the gods of self, approval, success, comfort, self-esteem, authenticity, and independence. The Bible gives a very different account. A God who is purposeful, creative, and loving. A God who makes good and very good things. This God created man in his image with love and purpose. And due to our unique status of being created in God's image, it is worth the cost for God to act in salvation. Not because of anything mankind did, but because of who we are created to be. Image bearers of the one true and living